Hey guys, welcome back. Hey, it's been a really long time since I made a video, but I thought I'd give it another crack and show you guys what I'm about to put together here. We've got a little small block Chev V8, so 350 block, but it's got a stroker crankshaft made by Scat. It's got a bunch of ARP bolts going into it. It's got some nice Scat conrods and some Hypertech semi-forged sort of pistons. It's got all sorts of goodies. We've got a Speedmaster gasket set that looks like it should have most of what we need to do. We needed the different sump gasket though, because this one, the dipstick's on the different side, so that was easy just to get a different one of those. It's got some nice Edelbrock Performer RPM aluminium cylinder heads, some nice roller rockers, hard push rods. It's got a brand new timing cover, brand new sump, a few brand new what are these, ARP sump bolts, and it's got a nice ARP oil pump drive. We've got a new Melling high volume oil pump for it. We're still waiting on a few bits. The camshaft actually wore out on this thing. It wore one of the lobes off the cam, so that's all gone through the motor, so that's why we pulled it all apart, and we've done new cam bearings. We've cleaned everything, taken all the bungs out of the oil galleries because they'll just get all full up with crap. Gave it another hone. I mean, it had been rebuilt not that long ago, so some of these parts are second hand, although yeah, we went through and just checked them, gave the crankshaft a new polish. So it's gonna go again. It's looking quite nice. And yeah, so the block's been cleaned, new cam bearings, and honed, and just checked over. I've taken all the frost plugs out of it because we're gonna put some brass ones in there and do it properly. And then yeah, so we're still waiting on a new camshaft, but I will be able to get the crank in and the pistons in and see how we get on with that. Now yeah, it's been really busy in the shed here. I just been real useless making videos. I've got 3 SR20s in bits that are all waiting on different things. I got my S13 here in the shed. I got a bit bored one day and I stripped all the subframes out of it. I stripped all the interior out of it apart from that seat, and I actually started taking all the paint off it. I know it had a little bit of surface rust starting to form when I had the fiberglass guards over it, and I wanted to deal to that. And then I sort of had a suspicion that there might have been a little bit of rust just in the top up here, and when I buffed the paint off I could see that. Because this is a sunroof model, they were very prone to leaking there, getting rust there, so I thought I'd deal to that while I could. I still haven't fixed the chassis rail on this. This is the one that had the flywheel let go and smashed into the chassis rail. I do have another chassis rail here. Shed's always full of stuff, just ends up as storage at the moment. And then on the other hand, my 180 here, when I bought this it was just a rolling body, no drivetrain, no engine, no gearbox, no diff. The roll cage was still all just bare steel, and it still needed a few little bits finishing up, so I've done that and then painted it, redone all the inside, put a dashboard in there. I had a bit of spare time over the COVID lockdown we had here in New Zealand, so I had this little non-turbo SR20 sitting here. I had a gearbox and I had a few bits and pieces to make it work. I made up a wiring loom and got that fired up over the lockdown we had. And yeah, just recently I have bought a new fuel rail for it. I put the 1000cc Bosch injectors in there. I bought a DIY manifold kit from Cinco because I figured I needed a flange, or the flanges for the header and the turbo anyway, and looking at the prices of that with a whole bunch of bends and a nice collector that they make, it was actually almost cheaper just to do that and buy the little 4-cylinder kit than get all the parts individually. So I spent a bit of time, made that little manifold, put my turbo quite far forward, which also gives me a lot of room for a downpipe. But yeah, this is just slowly ticking along on the back burner there. But anyway, enough of that. Let's start checking some clearances and putting this 350 together, or 383 together. Alright, so I've gone through, I've fitted all the main bearings and torqued up the bearing caps, or the main caps, to the ARP torque, because they've all got the ARP studs. And then I've gone through with my inside micrometer and used my outside micrometer to measure what that diameter there is. And then I've come through and with that same micrometer I've measured all the main journals and compared it to what the bearing clearance is, or the bearings are, and that gives me 2.5 thou on these four, 2.5 thou clearance, so that's pretty bloody good. And then on these Chevs, this back bearing, because it's got the thrust and it's a bit wider than normal, than all these other ones, they actually run a little bit more clearance, and this one is running a 3 thou clearance, which is exactly what you want. So I will take all these caps back off. I will do the same with all the big ends. I'll fit all the bearings into here. I'll measure all the clearances and compare them to the crankshaft, and then we will be almost ready to fit the crank. Alright, so we've just gone through, torqued up all these big ends with the bearings fitted, and ran through with the micrometer, the inside micrometer. So it's just a nice sort of just press through, so you can just feel a little bit of resistance but you don't have to force it through. And then measured, same feel on the micrometer, compared it to the crankshaft, and we have 2.25 thou clearance on all these big ends, which is going to be perfect. Now almost at the point I can start putting the crankshaft in, which is going to be good. So if I was doing this with all the bits and pieces, so mainly the cam, if I had the camshaft I would actually be fitting that first before the crankshaft, because it's easier to sort of help guide it in. But what I'm going to do, because I can't do that now, is actually pre-lube all these bearings before I put the crank in, otherwise it's nearly impossible to get that done. So we're going to use some Lucas Racing Assembly grease, nice smear, and we're going to run it around all of these cam bearings. So that on the initial start we've got no issues of parts running dry. That's going to kill it very quickly. And that's not what we want at all, especially after he's just had that happen. So I'm picking, the reason it ran the camshaft, or wore the lobe off the camshaft, is because there's actually a procedure. This was just after it had been rebuilt. There's actually a procedure to you got to follow to make sure you run the camshaft in properly. Now, if you just start the engine and just leave it idling and putting along, there's not a lot of oil being thrown around here, and the oil actually has to get thrown up and spray onto the camshaft off the crank to actually make it lubricated, because there's no pressure feed to lubricate the cam journals. or the lobes, sorry. And so when you first start it up, it's a little bit scary, but what you have to do is you have to start it and run it sort of somewhere between 1500 and 2000, 2500 maybe, for about 20 minutes, half an hour. And that sprays enough oil onto the cam, and by that stage the lifters have not really hardened, but kind of work hardened, because they're just soft cast iron as well. Just for these things, this is not a roller camshaft or anything, it's just a flat tappet cam. So yeah, you got to make sure you run that cam in properly, because it will do it. It's mainly any V8 will do that. Well, with a cam in the block, obviously not one with overhead cam. But I'll just keep lubing all these up, and then we can lube the main bearings as well. And then luckily for me, this is the latest small block that's got the two-piece neoprene rear seal, so I don't have to worry about one of the old-fashioned rope seals, because they're a bit of a nightmare to do. They're a bit tricky, they're quite time consuming to get them right, and then there's still a chance of it leaking. Well, there's a chance of any seal leaking if you don't quite get it right. But these ones are fairly straightforward. So now I'm going to put plenty of assembly grease on the bearing. The bearing itself doesn't start until here and there, so it's not the whole width, it's just this raised up bit here. And this one, plenty of this on. Now this has got the thrust washers, or the thrust bearings on this back journal. These are the ones I was talking about earlier. Now we need to put oil on those, because I still need to measure how much infloat the crank's got, and if I put this grease all over it, it's very hard to move the crank and it'll give me a false reading. So I'll grab some oil, lube that up, put the rear seal in, and then we can set the crankshaft in and start tightening it down. Right, so I found I got a packet of this pretty much plain engine oil, what you get with some head bolt kits. So this will be plenty good enough to pre-lube the thrust faces here. And then the same on the bearing cap. I'll actually do a bit on the crankshaft itself too, so that way nothing's dry when we start the thing. And now there's also these rear seals. So they're two pieces. They look like this. Quite hard to see. And the idea is, when you put them in the block, you can't have them on the same sort of level as the cap, or the block, so you set them off a little bit. So imagine the cap sits flat like that, so the gap is never on the gap. So we'll pop these in. I should have show you a bit better. Did you love that? Let's put RTV all over my pants. There we go. Alright. So the reason I got RTV is we actually need to seal along here and out to the seal, so that no oil will leak out through this gap across these faces. But see, I've set the seal so it's down on one side in here, and it's still sticking up out of the block there. That's so that these gaps are not where the block and the cap meet, which means we won't have any oil leaking out of there. So I'll put just a little bit on the actual seal itself. The same with that one. Now I've also put a little bit of that oil on the seal itself and on the block, because you don't want the seal to be dry either. Now we're going to sit the crank in there. Test turn. We know the clearances are right, but just sit it in and check anyway. So that's looking pretty lovely, sitting in there. Now I've gone through, I've put some assembly grease on all the cap bearings as well, and now I'm going to set up with my dial gauge to check the infloat of the crankshaft. Alright, so I've got my dial gauge with the magnetic base on the front of the block, and then the dial gauge is sitting on the crankshaft there. Now I need to check how much infloat. So infloat is the crankshaft moving forward and back, because there needs to be some, but not too much. So we were hoping for somewhere around 2 to 5 thou would be okay. This is an automatic vehicle. If it was a manual, you'd be looking a little bit different there. So if I put my screwdriver in between there and push the crank one way, I see we get, I can lever it and it'll go all the way to 5 thou. But if we just kind of get it sitting somewhere, it wants to be around that 2.5 to 3 thousandths of that way. And now I'll push the crank the other way, and we go to, we go to just back past our 0. So if I 0 that, and we go the other way again, we know we've got pretty well 3 thou of infloat, and that's before I put the back cap on. So I'll fit these 4, and then we will slowly tighten that one down and make sure that we still have around about 3 thou. Right, so crank's in, our rear cap's fitted. So what I did when I tightened it down, I still need to torque it, but I was originally pulling the crank forward, which would bring the thrust faces of the crankshaft and the cap in line, but I found when I did that, I didn't have the same infloat as I did before. So what I had to do was loosen it back off, tighten it again, but while I was tightening it, hold it the opposite way, and that gave me my 0 to 3 thou infloat again, which is perfect. I'll torque that and just make sure that we've still got 3 thou after I tighten it down. Make sure nothing silly happened. Oh. So now we stop at 4 there, and just about 3 there. Oh, 1 there. So 3.5 thou infloat. Perfect. It's all torqued up. Now let's have a look. Oh yeah. Now it's a little bit firm, but that's because I've used all that assembly grease, so it doesn't spin super easy as if it was just oil. But that grease won't go anywhere in between the time of me building it and by the time we get it back in the car and run up. Right, time to gap some piston rings. Right, here we go. So I've started gapping the rings, gapping the oil rings. They came up good. So I've gapped the second rings and they were good. And now I went to put one on the piston and you can see still sticking out. Doesn't fit in the groove. And then I grabbed one of the top rings and that doesn't fit in the bloody groove either. So this is as far as I can get today. We're going to have to try and get some different piston rings that will actually fit in the grooves. But yeah, until I get them, that's it. Thanks for watching. Please leave a comment, subscribe, and yeah, we'll see you in the next one.